6:55. 7:55, sorry, I'm used to the regular schedule.
We're done.
So if we could allow Susan and Barry to get through the presentation as best we can and hold anything until the end so that we can get through. And my name is Kyle McKessie. Welcome to the December 7th Academic Standards meeting. If we could go around the room and announce who's here, that would be great before we get started.
I'll go this way. It's Jerry Grubb, School Board Director.
Andy Block, School Board Director. Barry Desko, Director of K-12 Education.
Sue Elliott, Assistant Superintendent. Kathleen Mulholland, School Board Director.
Matt Frederickson, IT Director.
Denise Brooks, School Director.
Robert Frazier, Superintendent.
Ed Tate, School Director. Mike Thorwood, School Director.
Mary McKee, Member of the Public.
Bob Hickey, Superintendent.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So our focus tonight is our annual achievement report summary. And we're going to highlight the data from the 2016-2017 school year. Because we have a shortened meeting tonight, we're going to move through things pretty quickly. We're going to highlight the standardized assessments that our students take, so the PSA, Keystones, the SAT, ACT, AP exam, and then highlight our school's report card from the state, which is the school performance profile. So we'll start with the PSA. The PSA English Language Arts Assessment. So the spring of 2017 was actually the third year our students took the new PSA Language Arts Assessment aligned to the PA4 standards. The test includes 4 sections focused on measuring the standards in reading and writing. It includes question types such as selected response or multiple choice, evidence-based selected response, which are 2-part multiple choice questions, written response to a text, and a cold or an on-demand writing prompt. The chart that you see here and the following graph that accompanies it show 3 years of data indicating the percentage of students earning either advanced or proficient on the exam in each grade level. As you can see from the far right column, the CR change 2016 to 2017, we saw some small increases in grades 3 through 6 when comparing to 2016, but some larger decreases when comparing grades 7 and 8. This bar graph represents the same data just in a bar graph form. At the end of our presentation, I will go over what our action steps are and things we're currently implementing. So I will talk to you about what we are doing based on our district's analysis of these data.
Can I ask a quick question on the last chart, please?
Yes.
So this is a comparison of the actual kids in whatever grade it was each year. So if you were going to look at the same group of students, would they kind of find a diagonal
You
line?
could do a diagonal, yes.
So you'd see, so if you looked at grade 6 in 2015 with the 83, they were at 84, 8 in 16, and then now they're at 72.
Correct, yes.
So Andy, that's true, but if you look at all 3 years of 8th grade, you see numbers in the low 70s there to 1 year in the mid. So that's part of the difficulty of the cohort analysis, is that the state averages, across 500 school districts, 500 LEAs, aren't, they don't provide consistent data across tests and across grade levels. So that's why a lot of the times we'll compare ourselves to the state average or generate rankings, because otherwise you see that drop and you say, well, gee, what happened in 8th grade? When in actuality, 8th grade in ELA is depressed all across the state.
Yes.
And then they changed the tests or anything?
The test changed in 2015, and when the new performance standards came out, yes, that's why we only look at the 3 years. When the new performance standards came out and looked at performance across the grades, the 8th grade performance across the state was much lower compared to some of the other grades.
Which ironically, before that,
Was the opposite.
it was just the opposite. 8th grade
was the
numbers were
highest.
always increased relative to 7th grade or 6th grade across the state.
You said you're going to address what you're going to do about it, but what accounts for that? Why is that the anomaly in that chart?
The 8th grade?
Yeah.
I
I
believe
mean,
it's
that does
because of
stand
the
out.
difficulty of the test. The test became much more difficult and rigorous, and it's very rigorous in the 8th grade.
Agreed. It's a function of PDE, not a function of Council Rock, because any school district in the state that's putting up their data is probably showing a similar trend in 8th grade.
Yeah, but arguably, it changed for all the grades, like it changed for all the tests. So
It did.
what in particular in 8th grade can you draw a conclusion for? Because that does stand out.
And so,
The 8th grade test is just a much more rigorous and more difficult test. And you'll see when you look at math, there are certain grade levels in math that you see significant, when you look across the state, significant drops
So
as well. The test is harder in some grades than in other grades.
so normalizing, so there's no normalization against the states. If we took the state and we established that as normalized as 100, there's no normalizing this against that these are versus the state average, if you will. These are all just against a raw score. There's not a standardization. The only other thing I ask is when you show this data in the future, if you have decimal points, use them because, well, it doesn't matter showing this infinitesimal change between 82 and 81.1. I don't know if that's a rounding error or not. So we have to be consistent on
Sure.
representations.
So we'll move on to math. So again, same chart you see here for the last 3 years, each grade level. The math assessment has 3 sections on the test, and it includes selected response or multiple choice and open-ended response questions. Again, you see math. It's important to note, if you look at these numbers compared to what you just saw with language arts, these numbers are significantly lower. And that is true across the state. The math performance on the new test was significantly lower across the state than the language arts assessment. And that is true for us, obviously. Our numbers, if you would look back at prior to 2015, the old PSSA, you would see significant differences in student performance, and that's a function of the test that has become much more rigorous in math. So again, the far right column compares the 2 years of data, and you can see some decreases in grades 3, 6, and 7, and then some increases in grades 4, 5, and 8. And this also follows similarly with our state data, where we see trends that certain grades are much lower than others.
Are these averages or medians?
This is the percentage of students who are advanced or proficient.
Averages.
No, it's the total percentage of our students who are proficient or advanced on the test.
The reason I ask is because I can see where in grade 8 they might be introducing new concepts that have a broader range, and I'm interested to know if the concentration of numbers, if you look at a standard T distribution, if the concentration of numbers for their scores is now spread out over a broader area because they're introducing new concepts where previously with a very narrow band, many children scored very high in the middle and pushed. That's what I'm trying to understand.
There are some different elements to the different anchors across some of the tests, the things that appear in earlier grades that are different in later grades. I think when you look at particularly 8th grade, one of the things to keep in mind is that a good majority of our students in 8th grade are actually taking Algebra 1. And this is not the 8th grade math test is not a test of algebra. It's a math test. It includes algebra in the test, but not solely algebra. So our students in 8th grade are taking a course that isn't completely aligned to the standards that are being measured on the assessment. So that's a piece to keep in mind with the data that you see here. So again, a bar graph that shows the same information, just in a different form. The PSA Science Assessment, given in 2 grades, grades 4 and 8. And like the math test, it includes selected response and open-ended questions. And we've seen and have been seeing over the years relatively stable performance in 4th grade. On the PSA Science, we had a larger decrease in grade 8 this year. And again, that's something that in our action steps, we've been looking at why that happened and what are we noticing about that. So this again compares here, in this case, the blue is grade 4 over 3 years, and the yellow, or the column on the right, is grade 8 to show the change over time or the growth over time. Next, we have the Keystone exams, and these are our exams at the secondary level. These data represent the 11th grade cohort. So it's the students who were in 11th grade last year. So that doesn't mean they took the test in 11th grade. In some cases, when you look at the Keystone algebra, it's the kids, they took that test when they were in 8th grade. And then their best scores get banked to their 11th grade year for reporting purposes. So it's important to keep in mind that these data represent different grade levels when students have taken or retaken the exam to report their best score. Each of the Keystone exams has 2 modules, and the modules include selected response questions and also open-ended response questions. So one of the things when you notice the change, and this is probably comparing the test that we've looked at so far, when you see the change from 2016 to 2017 and see such significant drops here, is while it's not the sole contributing factor, it's important to note that our state had put a moratorium on the Keystone as a graduation requirement. So originally our class of 2017, which would be this group of students, our current seniors, last year's juniors, would have been required to pass these exams to graduate. But the state changed that and put a hold on that, so those students then knew, I don't have to pass this test to graduate now. So that could contribute to the fact that students may not try as hard or may not be interested in retaking the test because now I don't have to pass it. So while that's probably not the sole contributing factor to the decrease, I'm sure that it is a piece of data that contributes to why the change in the scores with all 3 of the exams.
And Sue, if you can stay on there just real quickly, just point out for perspective that while we did realize that decrease from 16 to 17 in all 3 areas, if you look at 2015 compared to 2017, we still have an increase in all 3 subject areas.
Thank you. Again, a bar graph that shows the same data, just in a slightly different way. And the next piece one of the things that we need to look at is beyond comparing to ourselves, we need to look at how we rank relative to other schools in the state. So the data on this chart show our ranking relative to all public school districts across the state. It shows there are approximately 500 school districts. So the first 3 columns show what our rank is relative to those other school districts. And then the last 3 columns show the percent range in which we fall relative to those districts. So for example, the PSA language arts test in 2017, which would be the top column on the very far right, we ranked 54th in the state, and we fell within the top 11% of districts in the state with the PSA language arts test. That ranking encompasses all grades that take the PSA language arts test, so grades 3 through 8 are all combined in there. Again, the Keystone would only focus on the 11th grade cohort of students with that ranking. So you'll see there that when you compare our ranking from 16 to 17, you see some changes in our ranking. So in some cases, our ranking has decreased. We've dropped in our rankings, and then our percent range has also fallen as well. So this, again, bar graph shows that same data. When you look at this graph, as opposed to the other graphs where you want to see the columns be really high, here we want to see smaller columns in our bar graph. We want to be lower in our rankings. And that's something that, again, we look at where we are relative to other districts in the state to really understand a better picture of our overall performance, to think a little bit more broadly about how we do. We always are, as a district, we're always well above the state average. So comparing ourselves to the state average really isn't a good comparison, which is why looking at all of the districts across the state, we can get a better feel for where we fall and how we should be performing, and can invite us to ask some questions and think about some data in different ways to help analyze what we need to do. So we also have exclusions, or students that opt out. So Barry's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, the board had asked what we were seeing in terms of the exclusions, and really this gives you that 4-year picture. Noticeably, you see in 14, we had about 10 students opt out, and this past year, only in the PSSA, we had 270 students opt out of testing. So it's a pretty significant number. It was across all of our buildings, all 10 elementary schools, all 3 middle schools. This does not include the Keystone opt-outs because we get a number of those too. The reason why I didn't include Keystone here is Keystone is kind of unique in terms of we offer that testing 3 times during the year. There's a winter testing, there's a spring testing, there's a summer testing. Some of our students are taking the first test. If they don't score proficient or advanced, they are scheduled to take it a second time, and that's sometimes when a parent is opting out. So it would not be a real clear indication of opt-outs because it means a student could have taken the test once or twice and then opted out after that, or it could have been they opted out the first time around. But because of the uniqueness of Keystone, we just didn't include it. But the numbers aren't quite as high, and part of what has contributed to some of the opt-outs as Keystone is when parents have heard that, as Sue said, it's no longer a graduation requirement for their children. After they take it once, they just say, I'm done. If I don't need it, why would I take it again? So it'll be a more interesting figure for us to track when it is a graduation requirement if we're getting opt-outs, because there's a follow-up to opting out of the Keystone that may require students to do a lot more project-based work. We're not sure where that's going with the state, but if that were to be the case, students may want to choose to keep taking the test rather than opt into this, lengthy project that they would have to complete and score proficient in.
Where's the run line out there?
Pardon me?
19.
They pushed it back again another year to 19, yes.
The 2020.
Yeah, 2020. That's graduating class.
19 is the one that's been exempted.
Yeah. So, and again, I think we're all hearing that we're anticipating that it's going to go away. It just hasn't yet. So it's really hard for families because if you're in that graduating class, they're asking our high schools when we're scheduling for the test, does my child need it to graduate? I'm hearing they may not. And all we can say is right now it's a graduation requirement. And if you choose to take the risk of not having your child to take, especially if you're taking like a biology exam and you're never going to be in a biology level course again, you're going to be in chemistry or physics, and now you're coming up to graduation, if the state doesn't shift that back again and put another delay or end that as a graduation requirement, I'm not sure what we'll do with those students. It'll be very difficult because it's just going to be a tough test for them to pass based on that. But again, the requirement is for, by state code, that the only opt-out is for religious reasons. You have to come in and review the test and share that you have a religious concern with the test and aren't taking it, but we are seeing more and more families who are just saying, my child's not taking the test. I'm not coming in to review it, and I refuse to let my child take it. So they are counted in the opt-outs, but they're not, at that point in time, a religious exemption.
And is that the same across the state?
That they're seeing those too? Well, at least within Bucks County where we have conversation, yes. And I would say these numbers are low compared to some of our school districts in the county. But more and more are seeing the parents' refusal to have the child take the test, but also refusing to claim it's a religious concern.
It's a national trend as well.
I'm sorry, Congress, why I stepped out. Those students that opt out, what do they do? That overseas?
What do they do?
Do they come to school?
Yes, they're in school and they're given some other alternative educational activities, depending on whether it's one child, sometimes it could be multiple children.
It's 130 middle school students choose occupy in the library or? I mean,
no, because there's classrooms available and they'll just rearrange their teaching schedule. So they'll have some teachers who are proctoring the test and then free other teachers up because their students are taking the test and put them in with the students who aren't. Okay. That'll also be interesting now since the state has reduced the amount of testing time for PSSA, whether that will have any, their shaved hours off of the testing. So we'll see if that lessens the concern of some parents.
That religious exception procedure is state mandated?
Yes, it is. Yeah. have to come in, sign an affidavit, review the test in the presence of a school employee, and then write their letter to the superintendent, who must issue a letter back to the family saying that received your request and you are exempt.
Glad for all those people who are burdenless with that.
Okay. So this is a picture of our SATs, and we are unable for the first year to give you a comparison year to year because many of you, if you have children in high school, know that we were making a shift from the former SAT to the new SAT. So there used to be a reading, a writing, and a math component, and a separate essay for students who chose to take that other component. They've changed it now to the evidence-based reading and writing, which is a single component, and math. So it's a different SAT scored the same way. It's a 400 to 800 range in the testing. So we have our first year, bless you, we have our first year of data with our students. This would be the graduating class of 2017. So it would be the collective scores in the new SAT. So if students take it multiple times, we do include the higher number in terms of what we receive back from the College Board. That gives you a picture of north-south, and then the only comparison we have right now would be with the state. So we'll now track this year to year as we get additional testing data with the new test.
Yeah, we can't rank ourselves. So,
You can compare math, couldn't you?
To,
Last year's math?
well, no, they changed the test too. So I don't think it's the, I think they changed.
They changed what they're measuring in the test?
Yeah, what, in terms of questions, and it was a complete revamp. So I'd be reluctant without asking that question specifically of the College Board to say, is it fair to compare those scores?
It's more like the ACT now. It's less aptitude and more content driven.
Looks like there's another question, so
No.
okay.
Nope.
so very back there. We don't see other schools, we don't know where we rank, similar to what you showed with the other measures.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It was even hard this year getting the Council Rock North in particular was not even sent their average score. So we had to work with the counseling department to work with the College Board to get that. I'm sure part of it is because of the reporting mechanism changing and shifting. We can find out if we can get some of those comparisons. They don't offer those to us. Sometimes we go on some websites of other states, so you can get some state averages sometimes. We're finding where you rank within a state as provided by the College Board. I've never seen that. I don't know, Robert, if you have or...
Historically, I believe PD has provided those spreadsheets. Well, I'm not sure though that they did.
Yeah, and that's usually almost like a year later.
It
right?
is.
It always falls like this
It always
time
lags behind
next year.
the other
I'm
years.
just thinking about how do you set goals? What are the measurements that you use to determine if we're happy with?
Yeah, we
this
do
or
have that data historically. I want to say last year, going back to our data from a year ago, that North was actually in the top 10 in the state, not 10%, but top 10 high schools. And South was somewhere around 40 or 45 or so, which in the state of Pennsylvania, you're probably talking about, what, 800 or 900 high schools. So it's, from a percentage standpoint, you can see the difference in the ranking relative to our PSAs and the Keystone exams.
I'm sure there was some work that can be done because I do know that every once in a while you'll get a publication that will rank and say, here's the top 25 high schools in Pennsylvania and how they rank, whether they do it from 1 to 700 or 800, I don't know. Okay. So the ACT is the other test that a lot of colleges, universities use as part of their requirements for admission. And as you can see, we are seeing slightly growing, but still growing numbers of students who take this test. Very different than the SAT in that it's a number of different subjects that are measured and scored. So some students, it is interesting, some students can do very well on an ACT, not as well on an AC or SAT and vice versa. Some students take both. Some colleges only accept one or the other. So the ACT was really kind of a Midwest where it started, where the SAT was more globally accepted around the country, and then ACT has been making some gains in that, and our students have seen that. So thus we're seeing more kids take it. Our students continue to do well across all subject areas as well as the composite score. both from year to year as well as compared to the state average. Okay. So AP, so there's a couple of slides, and I'll just give you a quick explanation and then have you, peruse the data and see if you have any questions on it. So the courses that we have students tested in AP, I think this year the only, and we'll flip to the next one and confirm that, I think Chinese is the only class that we don't offer the AP test, but we do periodically have students take AP exams in courses that we don't offer. So the course on the left, the number of tests taken within Council Rock, the percent of 3, 4, and 5, because 3, 4, and 5 is typically considered the score that would show college readiness, and then the average score within each of those testing areas. So we consistently, you'll see a chart a little bit later that shows the year-to-year comparison. Consistently, our students have done extremely well, even when we have a large percentage of our students, a larger percentage of our students taking AP courses as well as taking AP tests.
More pages, right?
Pardon me?
There's more.
Yeah, I'll flip after people get a chance to take a look. Good on that one? Go to next, which shows the grand total at the bottom also. And again, all those, interestingly, environmental, if you remember, was one of those courses we just had a couple years ago. We received a grant from the state to run that. We ran it in south, and then we grew it to north. And not only are we seeing, students from both buildings there, but 100% of them passing the exam too, which is pretty impressive.
And next year we'll be adding the AP Computer Science Principles to our list of AP courses that we offer.
And then this is the longitudinal look from 12-13 school year to last year, 16-17. Again, draw your attention to the number of exams. Part of the changes happen for a few reasons. One reason is that we have some students who choose not to take it once they get accepted to, if they're in their senior year, they get accepted to a college, they've already determined that taking this exam doesn't matter. The college isn't going to recognize it. They're not going to give me credit. They're not going to advance me in my course placement, so they just choose not to participate. So there are some of the reasons that folks don't participate, but you can still see a relatively high number of our students, and I just want to draw your attention to the number of test takers. Don't compare that to the number of students, because several of those students are in multiple AP courses. So it's better looking at the number of exams taken by our students compared to the number of students in there. And then, of course, the averages, most especially as that compares to what the state exam average is, which is very impressive, I think. To have 90% of your scores in the 3, 4, and 5 range is very impressive. Back to you.
So all of these standardized assessment data are used to create the school report card or the school performance profile that the state has created. So the school, each school receives a score based on their 2016-2017 data. And for this year, there were no changes in the metrics that were used to calculate that score. So if you want to go to that website, which we're not going to go to tonight, and you can look at each school, look at all the metrics used to calculate their scores. It's a public site. Everyone has access to it. You can search every school in the state of Pennsylvania as well if you want to look how other schools, their performance on the school performance profile. So a quick review of what is included in the school performance profile. So it includes 4 sections that schools get scores, and then there's a total score out of 100. However, you can get extra credit. So you have indicators of academic achievement, and that includes student performance on the standardized measures of the PSA, the Keystones, students who will go to MBIT, the industry standards assessments, as well as the SAT, ACT. So This section also includes academic measures focused on closing the achievement gap with students. So you see here that not only the data element, but the percentage it is of the total 40% of that score that's represented there. Some of the things listed are do not pertain to all grade levels. So for example, the grade 3 reading, that is only at the elementary level, that contributes to the elementary school performance profile, just like the industry standards-based competency assessments obviously don't contribute to the elementary. And the SAT, ACT College Ready benchmark doesn't contribute to the elementary score. So the other part to the indicators of academic achievement is closing the achievement gap. And this is a category that is actually repeated twice, once for all students and once for historically underperforming students. So it looks at the data in two different ways. And we're looking at our students, are we closing the gap towards 100%? So what the state has done is established a baseline year. So for high school or for the Keystones, the baseline year was 2013. For the PSSA, or the elementary and the middle school, the baseline was 2015 because it was a new test. And schools have 6 years to close the gap to 100% by 50%. So for example, if 70%, if you were 70% proficient in 2015, half of that, that distance to 100, obviously half of 30% is 15%. So you have 6 years to have 15% growth for your groups to close that gap. So unlike the past No Child Left Behind, where everybody was supposed to be 100% proficient by a certain year, the state recognizes the challenge of that, and now it's not to get to 100%, but to close that gap by 50%. So that's relative to a district's performance and where they fell at the baseline year.
So it's probably good to know that they don't recalculate that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So it's not every year we see what your 50% is. It's in the baseline year. Now, in this example, you've got to close that gap by 15% in 6 years. That's the goal. And so the state looks at what does that look like year by year. So in this case of the 15%, in 6 years, what should be happening is you should be closing that gap by 2.5% every year over the next 6 years.
Can I ask a quick question about this? I assume when you're referring to the percentage proficient, that's for the proficient.
Proficient and advanced, yes.
And the other question I had was, I'd be interested to see basic or below basic, those who do not meet the standard. How many are we talking about who are close to being proficient? Do you know what I mean? What's the distribution between those two?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that varies by grade level and subject area.
If you achieve that gap in less than 6 years, does that?
Good for you. You don't, like, there's no bonus.
Let's say you achieve it in years 4 and 5, and then 6 you have a weird year, then you fail. Does it matter?
To my knowledge, it doesn't, once you achieve that gap, that's, you have 6 years to do it, you've met that goal. I think the challenge is when you look at this is what I'll, allude to and say, actually, when we look at these data and look at our actual school performance profile scores for this year and see some of the changes, it's attributed to this particular category of the profile, because we didn't close the gap, whatever percentage for that building that needed to be closed, so then that hurts your score. Right. So it's kind of a challenging task to make that closure equally over those years. So the other indicator is the academic growth. So that's the PSAE measure that we use. Again, this is looking at PSSA and Keystone, and this represents academic growth of students taking that particular exam relative to their changes in achievement entering that year. So the PSAE data uses some very difficult statistical logarithmic algorithms to figure out the growth percentages and what's considered adequate growth. And this is part of the data that we get where it looks at our kids growing a year for a year, basically. Did they grow a year in a year's time? You'll notice there that the language arts or the literature is double the amount of math and science, and that's primarily because it's measuring both reading and writing. So the state made that a little bit more.
Is the concept that the elementary is rated higher than the others because it's more grades, more grade levels?
No.
Because it really was like a 2-to-1. The elementary on the earlier slide.
On the earlier slide? This one?
No, I mean, few earlier slides, where the weighting of it was.
This one?
Yeah.
Well, I think when you add things up and you take out what is elementary and what is secondary or middle school, it adds up. Yeah.
I get it.
It's percentages to get you to the 40% of that particular measure. So then finally, we have other academic indicators, which is 10% of the score. So the school performance profile looks at graduation rate, promotion rate, attendance rate as it applies to the appropriate levels. Also looks at, again, the AP, so how our students are doing on advanced placement courses or tests. So you see there that how many courses are we offering in the 4 core areas, and you get points for the number of courses that you're offering. And then of course you get some other academic, or some points for your participation in the PSAT as well. So there are ways to get some data that are not related to the PSSA and the Keystones. And then finally, we have the extra credit. So you can earn extra credit points, and it's up to 7 points. So the max score that you can earn on the school performance profile is 107. So you can earn extra credit for advanced, the percentage of students that are advanced and earn advanced on the state assessments, as well as your percentage of students that are a 3 or higher on any AP exam. So our performance on AP obviously contributes to our high school's school performance profile scores, so that gives us some additional extra credit points that our schools earn.
There are 5 things listed, so how do you get 7 points?
Up to 7 points. So you may not be able to earn all 7 of those points if you're not.
Oh, I see.
So here are a comparison of our scores over the, now you'll notice when you look at the 3 years, you'll see that 2015 is absent for our elementary schools and our middle schools. That again was the year of the new PSSA. So the state did not provide us with a school performance profile score in 2015, rather had, for reporting purposes, districts use their 2014 score a second year in a row. So as I mentioned earlier, we talked about how some of these scores have dropped, and that is attributed to either some drops in their performance on PSSA assessments, or the challenge with closing that achievement gap, whether it's closing the achievement gap for all students or closing the achievement gap just for the historically underperforming students, which would be our students with IEPs, our ELL students, and our economically disadvantaged students. So the state currently looks at those 3 categories as historically underperforming, and for reporting purposes and the school performance profile, they're put together in one group. So you can just take a second and look at the scores for each of the elementary schools.
So you want to explain it? It's noted at the bottom about how 2014 was the PSSA.
Yes. So we had a change in the test for the elementary and the middle school.
And it's probably good to know that as for schools that are struggling with the closing of the achievement gap, whether it's for the total population or for their low performing students, the following year is going to be even more difficult to meet the standard, because now they have to make up what they didn't make, plus So that 2.5% we're looking at on the example that Sue used, they need to do that 2.5% plus whatever they didn't get the year before or years before. So it gets harder and harder every year when you don't make it.
Here are the middle and high school SPP scores. So again, the middle school, we're missing 2015 because that was the first year of the new test, and 2014 was the old PSSA. And then the high school, you'll see 4 years there because the Keystone exam has not changed. So we can look at 4 years of comparative data with our two high schools. So again, you see that when we talked about the baseline here, I said it was 2015. That would have been their performance on the PSSA in those years. Even though 2015 is not noted in the school performance profile. That baseline is about how they did on that particular test, since the profile looks at each individual test and their ability to close the gap on relative to that particular test. So you'll notice that of all of our schools, our 3 middle schools had the greatest drop in their SPP score. Some of that is reflected in, if you remember earlier from the PSSA data, that in our middle schools, that's where we had some of our biggest drops in performance in 7th and 8th grade comparatively to 16 to 17. And again, that would also reflect some challenges with closing that achievement gap for all students and for our historically underperforming students as well. So it's important to, you know, as I noted, what really contributed to those, their performance. So what really is important to think about now is what are our action steps? What do we do? Now that we have these data and we're looking at things, what do we do? You look like you have a question.
I do, and if you're going to answer it, then I'll let you get to it. But you get right to action steps. I'd love to understand what kind of the self-reflection was as you looked at the data. What were 2 of the 3 big things that jumped out that were the insights that fueled these action steps?
Certainly. Well,
Is that going to be covered when you?
I'll talk about, yeah, I think I might, if I don't, you can.
Okay. I just want to know what you think about the scores and the changes in scores,
Yep.
and because that certainly would have led to what we're going to do about it, what you need from us.
So one of the things that's really important to look at with the standardized assessments, particularly with the PSSA and what we get back from the state, is the ability to then be able to really unpack the assessment, to really look at what are the areas of strength and areas of growth. As I noted earlier and talked about the different types of questions, we get data back from the state that gives us information about how did students do on certain question types. Each of the assessments is also divided into reporting categories or anchors. So for example, in math, you'll have a category on measurement, category on algebraic functions, a category on geometry. And so you get data back relative to the reporting categories. You also will get some disaggregated data that you can then unpack and look at particular groups. We get their scaled scores back. So when you look at our performance in that our scores, you know, while we saw some drops, we still are performing well. You start to, as a principal or a curriculum coordinator or a teacher, start to unpack down to the student level. What do we know about these kids? The kids that were really close to being proficient, what do we know about them? What can we unpack about the tests for those kids? And that is exactly what our principals have started doing and our curriculum coordinators have started doing. So for example, in math, we have a PLC, a pilot PLC at South that's targeting algebra. And they have been really looking at student performance and breaking down based on the anchors for the Keystone algebra exam. What do we notice about our kids? What did they do well on? What did they not do well? How do we support them? What are some things we need to think about? How does the test, the rigor of the test or the anchors of the test align to our curriculum? Are we aligned? Our math coordinator also broke down the data for every single building and identified for them 3 areas of growth along with resources for teachers. So here's an area this building showed need for growth. Let me give you some resources, and then the math specialists in those respective buildings then also have those resources to work with teachers and help them learn how to support students with those areas where we need to make some improvements. Additionally, we've really, last year spent a lot of time focused on the first critical question for PLCs, which is what is most essential for students to learn and understand and do. And that really speaks to understanding the standards, unpacking them, really thinking about what is it that students need to learn. And unpacking those standards has really helped teachers start to understand what the standards are asking, what's the rigor of what the standard is asking students to do. So for example, if a standard is about main idea and detail in a text, how are students expected to demonstrate that knowledge of main idea and detail in a text? Is it at a literal level where they're just expected to pick it out? Or is it at a level where they're expected to show a relationship of how this detail contributes to the main idea of the text? What's the level of rigor? So by unpacking the standards, teachers are beginning to more deeply understand what the test is asking and what the standards are really measuring. In language arts, one of the key areas that they noticed with the PSA assessment was that there was two particular question types that more of our students seemed to struggle with. So if you remember, I said there were 4 types of questions. So there were the multiple choice questions, there are the 2-part multiple choice questions, and then there's the written response to a text, which is like a literary essay. If you want to, remember your days in college where you read something and then had to write an essay explaining how the author revealed the theme of the text or the character's actions or some such topic. It's that kind of an essay that the students have to write at a grade and age standard appropriate level. And then also the 4th was a cold writing prompt. So they're given a cold prompt with no reading background or anything that they have to do to fit into the prompt. So it might be, they're in some of the prompts, they're given a picture prompt and are asked to write a narrative about what might be a story that happens at this house. Write a story of something that could happen here. So what we noticed when we unpacked the data further was that our students struggled most with writing in response to the text and the cold writing prompt. So that really spoke to something that as a district we need to think about. How are we supporting our students with the writing program and our writing instruction, as well as with writing in response to text. So that unpacking really led us to really understand a little bit more deeply what maybe we need to do. And then as a result of doing some of that unpacking, we are now working on providing some targeted professional learning opportunities for teachers based on that analysis. So some things that building principals or math specialists or literacy specialists within those buildings are working with their own staff, as well as some things that we'll be doing more on a district-wide basis to provide teachers with some opportunities. For example, at our Deep Smarts Day in February, where we have choice of workshops and providing some professional development for student teachers on some of these areas so that they can learn some strategies to help their students be more successful. We also continue to analyze our curricular resources and our instructional frameworks to make sure they're aligned, and that speaks to critical question 1 for PLCs, and also speaks to, which we will get to this topic later this year, of looking at something that you requested last year, which was kind of a 5-year curriculum overview of budget. So when you see that later this year, you'll see there are some curricular areas where, as a result of looking at this analysis of standards and how our core resources align to the rigor of the standards that we've discovered, we need to look for some new resources. So that's something, and that's like a little teaser for something to come, I guess.
That's great.
And then, our continued work to implement and become a professional learning community as a district will also continue to support our teachers as they're working in teams to really look at these data, look at their classroom data, and make sure that our students are learning these essential standards so that when they do take the state assessment, they are able to demonstrate proficiency with those things. So does that kind of answer your question?
It does, a great start. I would love to see what everything looks like when it's unpacked, and what are the insights by school, and in general, where are those specific areas of focus once they're all done? Because it sounds like it's a bit of a work in progress still. If I heard that right, it sounds like you found some real great insights that you're seeing already. It sounds like you've still got some more to find. Now, would we see that as part of, that could come as part of the 5-year budget assets, that these are insights based on the test scores, these are actions, here's what we need you to do.
Some of that, yes, some of that will definitely.
But I think that would be good for us to understand, not being necessarily experts in the field, and understanding what these scores are telling us. So it'd be great for us to be able to understand, here's what the scores are telling us, here's what we're doing about it, and then I think that's something that we should be talking about to the community.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because we've never, we've never been proactive about the great things that we do. We've been more reactive around trying to explain some kind of score that a publication puts up there. Sometimes it doesn't have a lot to do with academics.
Absolutely. Let me think about how to best organize all of that, because it's a lot of.
Yeah, no, it's not easy. We took a shot at it 3 years ago with this Council Rock scorecard that we have. So maybe there's a way to, use baselines here to set goals to help people understand what we're doing and actually measure our performance against some of these things that
Certainly.
we're doing.
Yeah.
With Andy asking that question, have we provided you with the analytical tools you need to do this?
That's a good question.
For people.
Or because, there is, yes, it's, it sounds like you can unpack this down to student level. There's
Absolutely.
software involved in order to
Well,
actually
I think some of that speaks to personnel resources. I would say our curriculum coordinators, when it comes to like some of the things I shared with you, like what we're doing in math and language arts, our curriculum coordinators in those respective areas are the most expert at, Julie Eastburn would be able to tell you in great detail, very good specificity, because she has combed over the math data with a fine-tooth comb of really looking at it from many different angles, as have our language arts, Pat Erickson and Andrea Houston-Lingman, and then Renee Devlin as well does it for science. So they know their data very, very well. And then they work within their departments and with their key leaders to really think about what we need to do. So in answer to your question of do we have the tools, I think that a lot of the analysis data happens once we get all the data in, and we can, it's in Excel, it comes as I guess it comes as a CSV file, I believe, and then we can manipulate it. So do we have any specific software? A performance tracker does some of that work for us and can do some breakdowns of things. So that does provide us with some additional tools. But there are also some other resources that we have access to through the state. So the access we have through PVAS gives us the opportunity to dig deeper into the data. And we also have some other access with links at the state where the data is broken down more, and we can play with it and massage it. So I don't know that it's a question of needing some kind of software as much as it is time.
It's a heavy lift.
Yeah, so I think this is where the budget comes together with this 5-year forecast comes together with organizational design that you're working on this year, because I think when we saw the operational piece, the capital planning piece spread out over 5 years, and what that did to fund balance, help people get their arms around the need to do things that maybe they weren't willing to do in the past. I think this helps you talk about staff. I don't want to add staff for staff's sake, but if staff were more productive staff, drive better results, that's where we should be investing.
What I wanted to look at was, there are 501 school districts in the state. Many of them are doing the same exercise. And so my question is, you know, if everybody's going home and they're doing the same data transformations on the same data sets to drive to the level, is this something where we could politely host some of the other school districts, people in your position, to come together at our school district and work as a group, that everybody does the pre-work, they come together and work through the transformations to create a de facto standard. So that the work you're doing is, we used to have a guy at O&J Roberts who was phenomenal in transforming data. And we often would leverage things he had done because our business manager talked to that guy, and we did that. I don't remember if that was years ago. Couldn't we, you know, even just among ourselves within the IU, gather people within your specialty to work through that together? So at least to your question before, do we have a standard together? Why don't we share that? It's not, there's no secret sauce. We're not competing with the district. We're trying to make it better and have a basis.
You know, one more thing that contributes to the difficulty in this is the timing of getting this information
Yes.
back. So we get this information late August, September, when everybody, so now you have, even if you could have that data and break it down by September, now your teachers in a full-time teaching mode, a little opportunity to get, when you want to break it down by student level, you know, if the state could get this back to us in June, and we would have the summer to put it together and give it, so when we open school with principals and teachers, we have the information right there in front of them. Here it is, December, and we're just getting to the point of being able to share the data that we receive.
You're always making decisions based on the year.
Absolutely.
Delayed data.
It's,
Are you through? It's 7:55, I just wanted to make sure.
I had one more slide, which was basically, these are the websites that you can go to look at some more data, if you so want to look at some more data. But I think, Jerry, to your point, you know, I have my contacts in other districts and folks, like, as soon as all this data starts coming out, we're like, okay, what you get? Let's talk, let's share, let's compare, to make sure some of it, like, make sure I'm doing it right, but make sure you're doing it right.
I'm looking right to Mike's point, which was, even if it was a Google place to share the tools that says, hey, look, when you get the data in this Excel format, if you grab it, paste it here, these 6 pivot tables already generate for you in your head. And you're consistent, so you don't have to validate it yourself.
Yes, and some of that depends on whether or not other districts want to engage in that process and share.
And some.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions?
awesome.
Thank you.